Many parts of the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area face substantial issues around housing affordability. Adding new rental housing would help, but how to get there remains a matter of debate. Here to offer some insight based on their study comparing Hamilton and Quebec City, we welcome Sarah Mayo, social planner with the Social Planning and Research Council of Hamilton, and Laura Katari, campaign coordinator for the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. And welcome back to you too. You were here, I guess, a month or so ago, and we are following up with your new study that compares Hamilton and Quebec City. Laura, start us off. Why those two cities?
Interestingly enough, we're fairly similar in size by about 5,000 people, in terms of how many young people we have, even immigration to our cities within a 0.1% difference. So looking at the two, and especially because it was different provinces, so we're under different legislation, we found it really attractive to try that one.
And what were you trying to find out, Sarah?
Yeah, we were trying to find out, well, these are very similar cities demographically in terms of what drives the rental market, number of newcomers, number of young people, population growth, almost all exactly the same. And so are we having the same housing crisis? And in Quebec City, they're not. As compared to Hamilton.
Can I just understand? So there's more rental stock available in Quebec City than in Hamilton?
Yeah, so the prices have not gone up as much. So in Hamilton, we're experiencing 5 to 7% increases every year in rental prices, including people who are already in their units. This is not, available units are going up even higher in price, but the entire rental market, about 5 to 7% increase a year, much higher than inflation. Whereas Quebec City is right with inflation, 1 or 2% a year. There has been their increases in the last 10 years or so.
What accounts for that?
Legislation.
Really? It's just different provincial policy?
Much different. So one of the things when we're talking about housing policy, and the big one, is vacancy control or decontrol, depending on how you look at it. We might have controls when someone is in a unit, but once they vacate the unit, the landlord has the option of raising the rent for the unit, however much they think the market will bear. In Quebec, it's different. It's different in the sense that all new tenants must be given a chart with what was paid for that unit in the previous 12 months. And they have the ability to renegotiate the offered lease rate. And I'm not sure, and Sarah might know this a bit better, but I believe there's a bit of arbitration around that as well.
So what they can do is, information is power. So the first thing is they can know what the previous rent was, which in Ontario, we don't have that right as tenants. And number two, they have the right of appeal. So tenants can say, hey, this rent looks way higher than the previous rent. I'm going to appeal. So they have 10 days. So it's not an enormous period. But like you say, it's arbitration. It's not automatic that that rent won't increase. The landlord just has to provide evidence to say, no, I did these renovations. That's why it should be more expensive. Or the landlord-tenant board can say, no, this is excessive, and no, the tenant is right. There shouldn't be an exorbitant a rent gouging happening, and so it rebalances the power between tenants and landlords. And in fact, even without having to go to the landlord-tenant board, landlords know, okay, I better not put it much higher. This was my experience when I was a tenant. Landlords know that because tenants have that power, they kind of reduce exorbitant rent increases and say, okay, what will the tenant accept without taking me to the landlord-tenant board?
What would stop a landlord from, let's say, telling a new tenant what the rent is, the tenant saying, I think I'm going to exercise my option within 10 days to challenge this, and the landlord saying, okay, that's fine, goodbye you, I'm going to just go look for another tenant?
Housing discrimination is a huge issue across Canada, and it is a pervasive one and one that not enough is being done. And certainly that can happen, but of course the tenant could then in that case, it would be sort of quite easy to show that they had been given that they had been discriminated against, and they would win their case quite easily. What's harder is the pervasive discrimination that people get when they call and they have an accent on the phone, and the landlord says, "Oh, it's taken." You know, we know that these things have happened. There's been studies, immense studies around discrimination in housing based on accent, based on racial, based on number of children, based on income, and it's a huge issue that needs to be addressed.
Laura, I know you said in terms of population, in terms of immigration rates, the two cities, Hamilton and Quebec City, are very similar. But Quebec City is not in the shadow of the biggest economic driver in the whole country, which Hamilton clearly is, being this close to Toronto. So I wonder whether or not being this close to Toronto messes with the study outcomes a little bit. I don't know. What do you think?
Yes, we're seeing an influx into Hamilton of people looking for affordable housing. And of course, competition and is a huge driver. But when we look at vacancy rates, we're not looking at a huge difference between the two cities. So competition remains the same. And yes, Quebec City is farther away, but you have Montreal as well, if people are looking to get out of a more expensive city.
Yeah, but nobody commutes from Quebec City to Montreal in the way they do from Hamilton to Toronto.
But even with people that have moved, I mean, anecdotally, I've seen people give up on commuting to Toronto after a year or two.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's not an easy commute.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't think that accounts for the cost. And was it a 5-year period that we looked at?
Yeah.
So it was 2017 back to 2012.
Yeah.
Hamilton had 700 new rental units created.
In total?
In total.
In that 5-year period?
In that 5-year period.
Okay.
And Quebec City had 12,000.
12,000.
12,000 compared to 700?
Yes,
Correct.
exactly.
Okay, what accounts for that?
And that is, I think, sort of the myth-shattering part of this study was we always get told in Ontario, oh, we can't have stronger rent controls because that's going to reduce the supply of rental housing. And first of all, we have very little supply of rental housing, so it's hard to go from almost zero, it'll make very little difference because we have so little. But in Quebec City, so they have stronger rent controls. They have this system where between tenancies there is some control in the rent, or at least tenants have the power of that. And yet the number of units is going up tremendously, and that's because rentals is a much bigger part of the market, and it's a much more stable rental market and a more stable housing form. And so people are happy to stay renters their whole life because it's less insecure housing than it is here, where people get evicted. There's an incentive for landlords to try to evict their tenants actively or passively because they know that once the unit is empty, they can charge whatever they want. And because there isn't that incentive in Quebec, there's much less evictions and it's a more stable life, and so people so developers are meeting the demand because that demand is very strong for rental housing because people want it. In Hamilton, people want to switch to ownership as soon as possible.
Let me put what seems like a couple of obvious facts on the table here. Number one, the policies that you're referring to in the province of Quebec were probably brought in by a Liberal government. The policies that are in place in the province of Ontario now are the responsibility of a Conservative government, and they don't seem to be too interested in tenants' rights at the moment. So,
except in Quebec, we have to say the Liberal government is sort of on the right in Quebec in terms of politics.
It's fair enough.
So it's actually the Parti
Liberals,
Québécois that brought them in Quebec City.
And the Liberals are, yes, more to the right of a traditional Liberal party in Quebec. That's true.
Yeah.
But they didn't get rid of those policies, did they?
No, absolutely.
Okay. So
it's interesting. I had the opportunity at the end of October to travel to Montreal to have a meeting about advocacy and movement building, and just happened to be a lot of housing advocates at the table, and a few from Quebec. And I was taken aside after one of our roundtable meetings. I said, do you people in Ontario have to learn to advocate and protest better? Like what you put up with, people in Quebec would never put up with. And I left there and I thought, I'm an advocate. This is what I do. And yet, compared to them, I don't see the outrage. But I think in Ontario, that outrage is coming.
Well, you know what, I should follow up on what I just said a moment ago by saying this as well. Sarah, the provincial Conservative government would also say, we are streamlining the development process. We are trying like heck to get as much supply built as quickly as possible. Purpose-built rental, not stuff that's going to go up as rental and then be flipped over as condominiums 2 years later. So that's their selling proposition right now. Have they got a good story to tell on that?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a lot of different things there is starting to be a bit more improvements in purpose-built rental. A lot of it is coming from the federal government because CMHC has a new rental financing program that has been in place for just a few years now, and so it has made it easier to build purpose rental in Canada. Provincial policies, we haven't seen anything that is particularly innovative that is going to, set the market on fire. And I think, back to the issue of like, would a government with a conservative bent be interested in giving tenants more power? To me, it seems obvious. This is the people. We want to help the people of Ontario, and this is a way that it helps people in Ontario without increasing the deficit, by just giving tenants a bit more power, information, right of appeal, and would really help tenants not feel trapped in their units. Right now, people can't move because they know that if they are living in an affordable unit, they won't find that on the market.
Do you think there's a disincentive to build purpose-built rental in Quebec City right now because the landlords and the developers do not have the same powers that developers and landlords in the province of Ontario have? Isn't that a disincentive to build there?
It hasn't been.
It hasn't been, though. So this follows, I call it the myth building that we have out there, right? If you make it too difficult for landlords, they won't be landlords. I have yet to find anyone who has money to turn into capital that doesn't want to make an investment. Will that investment take longer to see the same returns under those regulations? Absolutely. That I will agree with. But you're still going to get a return. None of the policies ask you to lose money on your investment. So I liken it to when we looked at minimum wage and the sky was falling and $14 was going to bankrupt everyone, and we ended up with more employment by the end of the year, not less. So I don't know if you want to add to
Sarah,
that.
you want to follow up?
Yeah, well, we have to remember in legislation in Canada now, housing is a human right. And so we as provinces, as cities, have to really think, okay, what does that mean? That means that we can no longer, we have to put some limits on the amount of profit that can be derived from housing. To say, yes, landlords, of course, have to be profitable. They are profitable in Quebec, in the province of Quebec, with stronger rent controls. They're still profitable, so we still want landlords to be profitable, but it can't be the most profitable industry, being a rental landlord. That is not fair to tenants. There are, international corporations coming into our cities in Ontario, buying up properties because they know that it's a quick return on their money.
Well, can I pick up on that?
That's not fair.
Because I think in the province of Quebec, they have a lot more, I think your study makes this point, a lot more smaller landlords, whereas in the province of Ontario, it's a lot more bigger players in the scene.
Players, yes.
How did that happen?
I think there's probably many different factors. I think that language probably is one of them, in terms of international corporations wanting to being more comfortable in an English environment than coming into a French environment. I think another one is just the type of housing. There's much more low density apartment buildings, so 3 or 4 or 5 stories across every part of Quebec, whereas in Ontario we kind of really concentrate buildings in high rises, rental buildings in high rises. So there's different factors.
Laura, it's all about finding the balance, right? You've got to balance tenants' rights with landlord rights, and I think if there were a landlord sitting at this table today, they'd say, "Holy cow, the system is pretty stacked against us already. We've got tenants who are too difficult to evict when they don't pay their rents. We say we have bad tenants. We have tenants who ruin our." Who physically damage our property. And we need to keep the rents at a certain level in order to pay for all of the difficulties that we encounter as landlords. Do they make a point?
Well, of course they do. And they are raising rates, and there's nothing in Ontario stopping them right now.
Well, rent review stops them.
Well, rent review, but if they go there and they show they've had expenses due to bad tenants, they can raise the rent. You know, yes, there's a guideline, but that can be raised if they have proof that they've needed it. Developing markets where you have good tenants that don't want to go, that are willing to stay there 2 decades. That's good for landlords.
It's good for everybody, isn't it?
Yes, you're not constantly doing credit checks and all this turnover. And people who rent invest where they are. So I think in the long run, it does work out for landlords better that way. The other part to that is, and I'm going to steal this, there was a third-party part of this report, which was the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic. And the head of the housing team, Stephanie, once said to a landlord that objected to where we were presenting what we were saying, she said, you know, there already is a power inequity. And that's why you're called landlords. And there are things that landlords can do to evict people, and that making it stronger and harder and less secure for tenants is not the way we want to go.
Okay. Sarah, in our last 20 seconds here, do I infer that one of the big takeaways from this study is you think the province of Ontario ought to adopt the in your view, higher and tougher Quebec standards?
I think stronger. And stronger yet flexible rent control between tenancies would bring a huge improvement to people in Ontario.
Gotcha. Thanks to the two of you for coming in tonight. That's Sarah Mayo from the Social Planning and Research Council of Hamilton and Laura Katari from the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. Appreciate it, you two.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.